Apple Fritter Attack by W. M. Cuppernell, Barking Dog Safari Books. At the edge of the sweet galaxy, just 300,000 miles from the glazed moon, there is a planet that is galactically delicious. The planet is home to a sweet people, more so in taste than in manners. They are an aggressive planet whose snobbery is only matched by its desire to conquer. The inhabitants are not just a mere donut. They are much larger, much more than glaze, plain cake, or even a glazed twist. The calorie denseness even exceeds that of their cousins. The bear claw and the cinnamon roll. They are doughy, apple-filled, and exceedingly stronger than the other donut holes they sought to conquer. Demands were made on the glaze, the twisters, and the sprinkles to either join their empire or allow apple fritter bases on their planets. That was almost a declaration of war, and all the inhabitants of the 25 known planets in the Cake Galaxy knew the Fritters had the strongest army. Just over 3 years back, they attacked without warning Planet Sprinkles and forced them to surrender by capturing their main sprinkle factory, stopping production. The poor Sprinkles, whose only defense was their appearance, were so peaceful and harmless that even the most battle-hardened donut would feel sorry for them. But that did not work with the Apple Fritter Special Forces, who were as ruthless as they were sweet. They made fun of the Sprinkles, calling them polka dots. In an act of desperation, the Sprinkles tried to fight back by sending one brigade against the Diced Apple Factory on the Fritter colony called Golden Delicious. The takeover of the factory was unexpected, but in the end, all it did was hurt the apple fritter fillings. Quickly the force surrendered. Planet Sprinkles was occupied by fritter troops. Schools were then forced to teach about the superiority of the Apple Fritters, and a photo of Emperor Applebottom was to be hung in every school and government building. This all happened without the awareness of Planet Bear Claw and Planet Cinnamon Roll, who were allies to the Sprinkles and would have come to the planet's defense. Now it was clear Emperor Applebottom had bigger fish to fry, or bigger cake to fry. Planet Plain Cake was true to its name. It wasn't bad, but it lacked sweetness so much that its tourist industry suffered. Practically no one came to visit, nothing fancy. Everything came plain on the planet. Even the plains were plain. Most other planets left them alone. The only ones that came to visit were beings from Planet Milk, whose representatives encouraged the plain cakes to take a plunge into their glass for a swim. The results enhanced the taste. Even the chocolate milks attempted to gain more acceptance. It was not universal. The coffees from the Caffeine Galaxy only had more of a monopoly over adult plain cakers. Children preferred milk and chocolate milk, not gaining a consensus. The milk ambassadors returned to their Milky Way galaxy without a treaty. Now, with no true allies, the plain cakers were on their own, which was fine if left that way. However, they weren't alone. Far away in what some may say was the Upper Crust Cake Galaxy, ultra-aggressive Planet Apple Fritter had eyes on them. Spies disguised themselves as plain cakes, then got back and reported that Planet Plain Cake was ripe for the taking. Emperor Applebottom and his general staff laughed at the word ripe, because they knew ripe was a clear reference to their apple filling. "That's it, we're attacking," Emperor Applebottom said in the war room. He was absolutely scrumptious, but he had only a 20% approval level. General Glaze Craze looked surprised and said,
"Excuse me, Emperor Applebottom, Planet Plain Cake is boring, but it is large. We do not have the forces to attack and defend our planet. We need time to prepare."
The other Apple Fritter commanders nodded their heads in agreement. Admiral Bakecake chimed in.
"Sir, the Apple Fritter Navy is ready, but our forces are spread. We can try to box them in, but some plain cakes may get sacked."
Emperor Applebottom was shocked to hear that.
"What? The plain cakers come sacked, not boxed? No wonder no one buys them by the dozen."
The other general staff members knew this, and also expressed their outrage. Finally, General Winchell McIntosh, commandant of the Apple Fritter Marines, came to the floor. He was enormously crusty. Little pieces of him were everywhere. Birds, raccoons, and squirrels grew fat in his wake.
"Emperor Applebottom," the Fritter Marine General said, "you know my service."
He continued,
"You know I have given pieces of myself in all your wars. Heck, sir, I just gave pieces of me in the hallway before I came in." The general staff was shocked that this Marine general, a veteran of no less than 40 intergalaxy donut raids, was falling apart. The Emperor interjected. "Hold it together, General McIntosh." He commanded, "We want you to take part in this, but you falling apart does us no good." One Army Apple Fritter general growled to two privates on guard. "You two, go into the hall and pick up pieces of the general and bring them here before the rats have a field day."
The two Apple Fritter troopers grabbed brooms and a dustpan and ran into the hall to pick up the pieces. Grateful and now smiling after being brought the pieces, the Marine General put them back on with a stapler that filled his missing spots.
"Sir," the renewed, crusty old Fritter Marine said, "the Marines and Army troops are ready as well, but it's plain to see we need more forces. There is no way to do this without a draft, and this cannot be solved by opening a window. We either draft, or we ourselves will lose and be conquered, and they will make us all plain."
The Emperor thought hard. He had to think because he knew his people were snobs and aggressive. No one wanted a war where one of their Fritter sons or daughters would return in a box. Just the thought of Apple Fritters being boxed and being the cause of somebody's diabetic coma was enough to make even the most warlike become peaceful. There could be demonstrations. There was already a separatist movement among the citizens, insisting they were not donuts at all, but pastries. Emperor Applebottom wanted to conquer Planet Planecake too much to back down, but he knew to have a draft he needed it to appear the Planecakers started it. Most fritters knew that their kind was excessive, more doughy, and it was often stated one apple fritter was equal to 3 glaze, and possibly 5 Planecakes. The problem was that 150 million apple fritters resided on the planet, but 10 billion lived on Planet Planecake. To make the population think they were attacked, a plan was advised to feign an attack on the fritter fashion industry, alleging a force was trying to turn them into plain Janes. Linking the fake attack to Planet Planecake, all fritters with any sense of fashion would demand war. The center of the plan, called Fritter Fashion Fitters on Pastry Drive in Applewood, was foolproof, because those who planned it were fools, and there was proof. After closing, 4 prisoner Planecakes, on the promise of freedom, were to sneak into the store, destroy all fashionable dresses and suits, and replace them with Planecake attire. Then the Planecake prisoners would be caught and confess to being agents from their planet, sent to turn apple fritters into Planecakes. The very next evening the plan was launched, called Operation Wardrobe Change, and went off without a hitch. The next day, with the smoldering remains of fine dresses and men's suits everywhere, was upsetting. But what was absolutely infuriating was the replacement wardrobe, plain Jane business dresses and suits. The planet demanded war, and Emperor Applebottom would give it to them. Let the chips lay where they may, even if they were apple chips. Addressing the planet, Emperor Applebottom gave his declaration of war, announcing war against Planet Planecake, who made a blatant attempt to cramp their style. The Emperor promised the plains war with everything on it. On Planet Planecake, King No Style only got word of what was planned when his military council received an alert of a massive buildup of forces from Planet Apple Fritter. Sensing no danger and not knowing of the imminent threat, the military council was not on alert. It was only after a war alert came from a Planecake outpost called Dress Down, which picked up the broadcast and the claim of a Planecake attack. King No Style was shocked at the allegation. Planet Planecake hadn't had conflict since Planet Glaze had tried to invade and give them a tasty topping. This was under the reign of his great-grandfather, known as King Bland. Thinking fast, he stopped the war by offering a concession of some Planecakes into blueberry donuts. Luckily, Planet Glaze had their own problems. The then leader, known as Sweet Frost, was overthrown by angry citizens. The invasion was stopped, a treaty was adopted, and the blueberry deal was accepted. But this was different. It was the whole planet demanding war on their planet. Thinking fast, King No Style sent out his poorly dressed diplomats to profess their planet's innocence. But upon entering, they were turned back by glazed sugar cannons. The war cry on Apple Fritter was,
"Don't mess with our dress."
Shocked, confused, and scared, King No Style knew war was coming. He had to be ready for defense. Luckily, they saved tons of money on no glaze, and their species, Planecake Naked Warriors, spent less time in production. Meanwhile, on Apple Fritter, draft notices were going out to all fritters from 18 to 26. Scores of young fritters at clubs and basketball courts were suddenly hit with draft notices. Now drafted, their mouths fell open in shock. All were to be inducted into the army. Realizing their days of loafing around in their cumbersome coats of glaze and apple-filling insides were going to be trimmed by hard military training, they were going to war. The Planecakes were to pay for cramping their style, literally. The Fritter Marines were offering lucrative packages, promising more Fritter dollars and more rewards for time at the front. Appealing to the young Fritters' sense of toughness and adventure, several signed contracts, only to regret it when they faced the harshness of Apple Fritter Marine Boot Camp. Their coats became hardened. They were forced to climb hills with heavy loads and yelled at by harsh drill instructors whose motto was,
"All pain, all gain."
Army paratroopers and naval space warships all readied for the invasion. The fritter economy was under strain. One family, the Applesauces, were barely watching the news and were too lazy to check their mail. Their son, Sticky Applesauce, had just graduated from baking school and was to receive his diploma and final coat of glaze. Suddenly, there was a knock at their door. Father Applesauce walked to the door and opened it without looking through the peephole. To his surprise, it was 3 Army police who had come for Sticky. One burly fritter with stripes and a starched MP uniform spoke firmly.
"Where is Sticky?"
It was more a demand than a question. Father Applesauce was shocked and clueless as to why the Army police would be there asking about his son.
Why, Sergeant? Father Sauce asked. Has he done something wrong? He just graduated from baking school and his band just scored a #1 hit on the charts.
The sergeant got out his clipboard while the 2 menacing MPs looked on with steely eyes.
"Sir," the gruff sergeant spoke, taking out his clipboard and holding it up for Father Sauce to see, "your son was to report to Army training last week. He ignored the notices we sent, so we are here to escort him to camp right now."
Nervous and scared, Father Sauce mumbled.
What? That can't be.
His eyes nearly bugged out seeing his son's name.
Did he enlist without telling us? He inquired. He's not Army material. He is far too flaky. His glaze gets everywhere.
The sergeant looked at the man like he was the most clueless fritter on the planet. He may have had a sugar coating, but he would sugarcoat nothing.
"We are at war, sir. Every apple fritter has to do his part. Your son Sticky is coming with us. Now where is he?"
War? War with whom?
Father Applesauce now cursed his own lack of interest. He was retired and spent most of his days listening to old records from his favorite band, the Apple Slices. The sergeant lost his patience and yelled,
"Listen, you, we got no time for dealing with someone lost in the sauce. You either take me to Sticky or you are coming with us, and I will make sure you are in the very front of the front lines."
Now in fear for his own glaze, he had to take them to Sticky. He couldn't go to war as he didn't have the dough and it was not fresh. Telling the military police where to find Sticky, they headed down to the local club where every night Sticky's band, called Sticky Sauce, would party and perform. Sticky's dad felt guilty, but he thought maybe the Fritter forces might be good for his son. He wanted Sticky out of the club scene and to be responsible. Sticky Fritter took the stage with his band, the Fritter Fighters. The crowd, mostly well-dressed female fritters, screamed in excitement, and many passed out. The soldiers made it through the crowd, stepping over passed-out female fritter concert-goers. The soldiers were approaching the stage when the Fritter Fighters broke into their hit single, "I Will Be Your Apple Fritter." The lights were turned low. Only Sticky and the fighters were in the spotlight. The crowd came alive and rushed the stage. The soldiers became lost in a sea of female fritters screaming and trying to get close to Sticky and his band. The soldiers were stern. They intended to grab Sticky off the stage and take him to training camp. They also had orders that his band members were being drafted too, and if anyone got in their way, take them as well. However, when the first guitar sounded, they listened, as the song and music were very catchy.
Baby, I know it wouldn't last. My fritter flavor is not over fast. So hard to eat, we're thick with glaze. We stay fresh for an hour, not days. Far too sweet to be bitter, but I will always be your apple fritter.
The first shriek was heard from the crowd, then another. Thuds of female fritters passing out or breaking out in uncontrollable crying followed. Even the sergeant, veteran of many apple fritter wars, became misty-eyed. He came to attention, remembered his mission, and ordered his soldiers to take the stage. As they reached the stage, Sticky started the riff to their newest song, Fritter Paradise, sure to be the band's second hit. Before Sticky got out the first line, the sergeant grabbed him, while the other 2 went for the band. Seeing this, the female fritters freaked out and went to attack the MPs. Only quick thinking by the sergeant prevented disaster. He screamed at the crowd,
"Get out of my way, or you will be on your way to basic training like this band."
Fearing being drafted and the end of their party scene, the crowd made way. As Sticky and his band were escorted out, shouts of "I love you, Sticky" and "Fritter Fighters rule" filled the club. The sergeant made a call, and a van pulled up with 4 more MPs. Sticky, sporting a bandana, sweat dripped down his glazed body as he looked confused. The 3 band players were stunned, going from the stage to being drafted.
Where? Sticky said nervously. Where are you taking us?
The sergeant yelled,
"Shut your apple pie hole, Private. You and your band are heading to Fort Bad Seed, where the only singing you'll be doing is in formation. However, you and your friends will still have instruments. Maybe not guitars, but Fuji-spiced apple glaze guns. By the time you're done, boys, you can glaze any plain cake from 100 meters. We will show them our good taste and give them some of their own.
Upon hearing this, the four scared fritters looked at each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. 2. Having their cake, but not eating it to Johnny Plain, had no style. Living on Planet Plain Cake was boring. There was absolutely no flash, design, or even color that could be considered attractive. The only problem he could see was that exactly the way King No Style and all the citizens wanted it. Everyone felt the same except him. Johnny spent his free time making designs for his plain donut body exterior. He wished he could be like his cousins, the Glaze, but it was pointless. He was a plain cake through and through, and had no hope for changes. Johnny had heard through the news about Planet Apple Fritter mobilizing and the possibility of war, and he was happy about it.
Anything is better than this boring life, he said to his friends. I'm going to enlist the first chance I get. War may be the only thing that stops us from just being another plain donut. Who is with me?
He was confident his friends would join. His 4 friends, who had all been together with him since they were donut holes, looked scared. They had all gone through school together since they were rolled. Johnny had always been their leader, but now he wanted them all to enlist in the army as doughboys.
No way am I going to fight for King No Style, Paul Fried Cake said. The Apple Fritters are huge. I know we are all buddies and all, but just glaze on one of those would cover us all. We would never get it off us.
Yeah,
Said the other 3 in agreement. Another said,
Johnny, you put the nut in the donut. They must have taken you out of the oven too early. Besides, the army makes you wake up before the sun, and this plain cake, pointing at himself, likes to sleep late.
Johnny, seeing his friend's lack of enthusiasm, got angry.
Too early?
He said, almost shouting. He turned to the friend who said it.
Too early? You plain cake wimp. We came out of the oven at the same time. We all did.
The other friends nodded in agreement.
If you think I'm nuts, we all are. That isn't a name, donut. If there's a draft, we won't be able to stick together, but we will be sticky, all covered in glaze from some fritter marine.
He then calmed himself and spoke in a quieter voice.
The Apple Fritters are drafting. We soon will be too. They plan on coming here and taking us over unless someone stops them. Unless we stop them. What do you say? We can't let these apple glaze punks take over our planet and ruin our boring lives with sweetness.
All 4 friends nodded in agreement. They all got on their bikes, rode over to the army recruiter, and joined. Their families freaked. However, they knew when the apple glaze hit the fan, their sons had to be ready. Meanwhile, Emperor Applebottom was going crazy. He really had war fever. His military advisors begged him not to invade, telling him about the massive plain cake population.
Sir, General Hard Apple Core said, the plain cakes have 10 billion on the planet and even more in the oven. If we do this, one apple fritter may have to glaze 100 plain cakes. No force in the sweet galaxy can cover them all.
Emperor Applebottom just smiled and began laughing uncontrollably.
Oh, we'll take them. One fritter can coat 1,000 plain cakers with our deliciousness. We must do this, General Hard Apple Core. We must take over their planet. I'm putting a new order. No more plain cakes. They must have a coating. Our children, our little doughs, must not be exposed to their bare bottoms.
General Hard Apple Core began to panic.
But, sir, our forces...
Emperor Applebottom cut him off, looking sternly at the general.
Now listen here, General. I'm not going to let you come in here with your facts and common sense and ruin my war. Now get your forces ready. In 3 days, we will be having a party in the Plain Cake Pavilion at Castle No Frosting.
The general left disappointed and defeated, and readied his forces for attack. Sticky Applesauce and his band had by now completed their basic training. The training had been exceptionally hard. Sticky's loaf became tougher, and they had all become experts in firing the Fuji apple-spiced glaze guns. They were to be assigned jobs. Sticky was hoping for something far behind the lines, where on weekends he could play his music. The band too hoped they could all be together in some cush job where they could still rock out. However, it was not to be, for when their names were called, they all stood shocked, mouths open. They were assigned to the famed Apple Fritter paratroopers. Sticky went to his commander and protested. He punched a hole in his side, causing a leak of his delicious apple filling. He went up to the brigade commander and protested. He came to rigid attention.
Sir, he pleaded, I cannot go. I have a leak and I'm afraid of heights.
His band, seeing his antics, created their own leaks. The commander was not having it. He looked at these fritters as if they were crumbs. With his shiny 2 stars on his collar, He went up to the troops. His face showed no sympathy, only irritation.
Troopers, he began in a growl. Ain't one wannabe pastry in our whole division that wants to be here, but you're here. That's a fact. You all are leaking like wounded fritters that got caught on a box cutter. Let me tell you a secret, sweet rolls. No one cares. Emperor Applebottom needs fritter paratroopers. That's where you are going. Even if you all suddenly exploded into 10,000 crumbs and fritter pieces, we would put you back together and ship you out. Now, do you understand, Apple Fritter paratroopers?
Sticky and his 4 band members offered a weak, "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, on Planet Plain Cake, Johnny Plain and friends had just completed their boot camp at the notorious Crow Island. It was particularly hard because not only did you have to be wary of the harsh instructors, you also had to watch out for the crows, who loved to swoop down and take a piece of some weary recruit. There was a strict no-pecking order in place. The crows never read it. 3. Donut Wars. Finally, the commands of Planet Apple Fritter had gathered the forces for the invasion. The costs were immense. Every class except the rich on Planet Apple Fritter got a huge tax hike. The quality apple fritter, that was a birthright of every citizen, was now reduced to a freeze-dried, rationed model. The term, "they don't make them like they used to," became a common phrase. It was a massive gamble. Much-needed glaze, too, was being kept from the public strictly for military use. Some started to grumble. Why are we going to glaze plain cakers when we need that glaze for ourselves? Protests gathered. Emperor Applebottom was too busy on his war footing to see the icing on the cake. Sticky and his band had completed their paratrooper training and were about to be dropped into Plain Cake, not far from Castle No Frosting. Sticky and his band felt they were ready, but they felt no anger toward the Plain Cakes. They couldn't care less about Fritter Fashion Fitters and Pastry Drive. He did not even care if the Emperor himself had no clothes. Yet here they were ready to coat the coatless. The tag that was being used was, "Make them go from icky to sticky." Sticky shook his head, hardly believing he had to do this. However, what caused him and his band members fear was this: could they actually glaze some plain cake that came into their sights? One could never know until the heat of the moment. Ships full of battle-ready fritter marines had to be calmed, as they were ruthlessly glaze-thirsty and had to be mellowed down. Emperor Applebottom gave orders that no plain cakes would be spared. Regardless of age, the troops were not to stop until all cakers were covered with icing. The ships were formed, entering Planet Plain Cake's outer rings, that were coffee and sometimes milk. The ships were now surrounding the planet. Apple Fritter forces moved in, not knowing that Johnny Plain and his platoon were waiting for their arrival. The defense plan was simple: remove as much glaze, cinnamon sugar, and icing, in the hopes that once exposed, they would have to retreat in modesty. The Plain Cakes were clearly outgunned, but what they had were super-powerful water guns and cannons. The Fritter forces slowed to 300 miles per hour, not thinking there would be any resistance, unprepared that their very sugary coats were in danger. In small pods, the Fritter paratroopers hovered over the target. Sticky and his band were among them. 4 Fritter pilotless gliders circled over the target. Nervous troopers prepared to jump into the darkness of milk and coffee, even with fear of being dunked.
"Ready, hook up," the sergeant major screamed.
He paratroopers obeyed. Sticky's eyes almost bugged out of his head. He still wore the bandana, with his band's name, the Fritter Fighters, under his helmet.
"Equipment check," the sergeant major shouted.
Instantly all troopers, including Sticky, made sure everything was working. Soon the door was pushed open. Green light. Troopers were rushed out into the cool air, as milk and coffee in the outer ring had its own atmosphere. The jump went relatively easy until halfway down they were met by huge water cannon fire. Some fritters instantly blushed as the pressure wiped the coating right off their rolls. Too embarrassed to fight, they were rendered useless. Their fellow troopers returned fire, glazing a plain cake defense line with sugary glaze.
"It's a trap," Sticky yelled to his squad.
He looked over and saw his drummer had been hit by water guns and was now entirely coatless. Embarrassed, he was hiding behind a milk truck as Sticky and fellow troops returned fire. Sticky charged some plain cakes that were protected by coffee beans. He shot 2 plain cakes with his Fuji apple spice guns. The 2 plain cakes, bare since birth, suddenly coated in glaze and spice sugar, were so confused they couldn't move. Johnny Plain opened fire on more fritters, who went from well-dressed to less. The battle was not going well for either attacker or defender. Donuts were getting glazed and others washed clean. The battlefield was so confusing. Finally, 4 Apple Fritter gunships formed over milk and coffee and coated it in icing. Luckily, Johnny Plain and his friends were on the last pod to escape into Planet Plain Cake. While the Apple Fritters cheered their victory, Emperor Applebottom gave out medals. The victory was complete, but hollow. Just looking at the hundreds of bare fritter troops, stripped by water cannons and crying in embarrassment, told the story. Sticky just looked around. Bringing 2 sticky-covered plain cakes into captivity? He knew now the war was not the answer. Emperor Applebottom was again approached by his chain of command to stop the attack. Admiral Bakecake, General McIntosh, and General Hard Apple Core went to see the Emperor, advising him of their embarrassing losses. The Emperor was too giddy to stop. He wouldn't listen. They prepared for invasion. Johnny Plancake wanted revenge. 3 of his friends were so caked in glaze they may never be unsweetened again. The Plancakes were ready. They had gathered over 1 billion troops to meet the Apple Fritters with overwhelming water flow. They were going to get their chance because they were coming. 15 troop carriers were now overhead, full of Apple Fritter soldiers and Marines. Sticky, too, was angry over his friend's nakedness. Bright red in shame and crying, he felt so sorry for what had been done that he wanted to pay the Plancakes back. On planet Apple Fritter, many citizens, including Sticky's mom and dad, wanted their rolls home. They were very angry and started to doubt the attack on Fritter Fashion Fitters. One anonymous source, his Apple Fritter features cloaked in shadow silhouette, was making the rounds telling all news networks the pastry drive attack was staged, all to start a war for a mad emperor. Glazed sugar and spice prices were now through the roof. To get quality apple filling, bootlegging was taking hold. The black market was becoming the only way to buy goods. In regular markets, almost all young fritters had been drafted. Older fritters were trying to fill the jobs, but moved more slowly. Nobody was happy except Emperor Applebottom, who wanted to conquer everybody. There were even stories he was threatening Planet Jelly Donut, telling them they were next. Apple Fritter intelligence was supreme. The planners warned about the troop levels. 150 million fritters, even if they were elite, could not defeat 10 billion plain cakes. Still, the orders were clear. Attack! 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 Those were the orders despite the prospect of the revenge of reality. On Planet Plain Cake, the military uniforms were drab, lacking all flash. You could barely tell a plain cake private from a general. Even if the plain cake was extremely brave, the term highly decorated was unheard of. The plain cake general staff knew they had the numbers. They knew even if millions had to be sacrificed to sweet sugary frosting, they could never spray us all. Johnny Plain and his friends were ready. The Apple Fritters were now threatening their neighborhood. They vowed to fight to the end. Johnny felt they were ready, though seeing 15 huge Apple Fritter warships stocked with troops would make any plain cake crumble. Troop morale for the Apple Fritters was low, save for glaze-thirsty elite troops. The plain cakes, even King No style, all donned water guns and cannons. Morale was high. This was for the planet and their way of life, however boring. The defense was ready. Apple Fritter gunships unleashed the first frosting of the Apple Fritter attack. Coating went everywhere. The plain cakes tried to keep their heads down from the glazy rain. Several were hit. Others fired back, washing away some fritter fashion. The battle continued all over the planet as both forces fought each other to the end. The Apple Fritters were better trained and armored, but slowly something started to change. Despite being able to spray hundreds of thousands of plain cake troops and positions saturated in sweet coating, it was not enough. The astounding numbers the plain cakes could produce became too much. Dozens of plain cakes were glazed, only to be replaced by dozens more. Millions of plain cakes charged fritter troops. Hundreds of thousands were hit, but more got through.
There's too many of them, Sticky shouted. We need to get out now.
All the troops yelled out in agreement. Overwhelmed, some platoons threw down their Fuji guns and surrendered. It was becoming chaos. Whole divisions were being lost to embarrassment. An apple fritter without its glazed sugary coat was just an extremely large plain cake with apple filling. Even the medics, who had emergency supplies of apple filling and glaze, were running low. One fritter division, the elite 101st Apple Orchids, sent out an emergency signal. They were out of frost and icing for their weapons and would be forced to surrender or face nakedness. They said this may be the last communication before moving to a plain cake POW camp. On hearing what was happening, the admiral and generals shuddered and discussed what to do. Finally, they all agreed and ordered the arrest of Emperor Applebottom. The Fritter Command sent a message to the mission to stop the attack at once. Several glaze-thirsty Fritter Marines refused to stop until General McIntosh threatened to come down there and personally remove their coating with a water cannon. All troops stopped firing. Millions were picked up by waiting starships and taken back to planet Apple Fritter. The Emperor did not go quietly. He had to be sprayed by water cannon, and embarrassed. He went quietly and was placed into a mental institution. Admiral Bakecake took over and immediately sent out peace envoys to Planet Plain Cake. They did not have a frosty reception. Peace was restored. Johnny Plain Cake wanted no more of military life and returned appreciating his boring life. Sticky Applesauce went back to life with his band. He even came out with a new song, watered down on Planet Plain Cake. As a way to make amends, he agreed to play a free concert at the Plain Cake Pavilion in Castle No Frosting. Johnny Plain and friends did attend. The Apple Fritters realized, while they may be elite, never forget quantity has a quality of its own. Live and let live. Not every donut wants glaze and sugary spice. They deserve to be what they are, no matter how boring. The end?